My Playful Wife, Episode 34, The Empty Room, written by Mia. The collection sold, the cloth went out into the world on other people's bodies, and 3 days after the December room, my wife sat down in the middle of her empty workroom on the floor, with her back against the cutting table, and did not get up for a long time. I want to describe the room because the room was the thing. For 2 years, that room had been a body straining toward a deadline. Bolts of cloth stacked to the ceiling, the rose dark and the gold and the difficult ones, pattern pieces pinned to every surface, the dress forms wearing their half-made ghosts, chalk dust in the light, the whole space dense and breathing and full. And now it was bare. The collection had shipped. The buyers had taken the pieces. The rose-dark centerpiece was in a wardrobe in Ahmedabad, I imagine, or wherever the weeping woman lived, waiting to be worn to the wedding or the anniversary, or whatever occasion a person buys a slow flame of a dress for. The dress forms stood naked. The tables were clear. The cloth was gone. The room that had been so full it could barely contain her was, suddenly, just a room, with good light and nothing in it, and she sat on the floor in the middle of all that emptiness like a woman in a house the day after the funeral. I had walked past that room 1,000 times in 2 years, and it had always been a place of furious becoming, and now I stood in its doorway with 2 cups of chai I had carried in without thinking and did not know where to set them down, because every surface that had ever held a making was bare. An empty workroom, I discovered, is not a quiet thing. It hums. It hums with the absence of the thing that was so recently roaring in it, the way a hall hums after the music stops, the silence in it shaped exactly like the sound that has just left. I knew the shape of it a little from my own smaller version. There is a particular flatness that comes the morning after you finish a thing you have poured yourself into for a long time, and the bigger the thing, the flatter the morning. I had felt it in miniature when I closed each notebook. That strange deflation, the anticlimax of completion, the way the achieved thing turns instantly from a mountain you are climbing into a small object behind you on the road. There should be a word for that specific grief, the grief of the finished thing. Not the grief of failure, which we at least understand and have rituals for, but the stranger grief of completion, the small bereavement that arrives precisely because the thing went well and is now irreversibly over. We are taught how to mourn the things that break. Nobody teaches us how to mourn the things that finish. And so we feel the completion grief and assume something is wrong with us, that we are ungrateful or broken, when in truth we are only standing in the ordinary emptiness that every finished thing leaves behind it, like a footprint pressed into wet ground. But I had never poured 2 years into anything. I had never made a thing that hundreds of strangers came to a room to witness. Whatever I had felt closing a notebook, she was feeling at a scale I could only guess at, and the guessing was most of what I had to go on because she was not, in those first days, saying much. "I should feel wonderful," she said on the second evening, flatly, to the ceiling from the floor. It went perfectly. It went better than perfectly. I have nothing to complain about. I have everything I worked for, and I feel like someone scooped me out with a spoon. And here was the test, the precise, specific test the whole 5th notebook had been training me for, and I almost failed it because the old reflex came up so fast and so dressed up as love that I nearly didn't catch it. The reflex was, cheer her up. It came up my throat as a whole arsenal of bright, useful things. You should be so proud. Look at what you did. The weeper, remember the weeper. Let's celebrate. Let's go out. Let's call your mother and tell her. Every one of them true, every one of them kind, and every one of them, I understood just in time, a way of telling her that the way she actually felt was wrong and needed to be corrected. Cheering someone up, I have slowly learned, is fixing in a brighter coat. It looks like support, and it is underneath a request, Please stop feeling the uncomfortable thing because your uncomfortable thing is uncomfortable for me. The cheerful husband bustling in with reasons to be happy is not actually meeting his wife in the empty room. He is standing in the doorway of it, holding it open, asking her to please come out and be all right so that he can stop having to look at her not being all right. I had been that husband for years before the balcony. The doorway husband, the one who arrives with reasons to be cheerful and mistakes his own discomfort for generosity. It is the most respectable way there is to abandon someone, to abandon them while appearing to help, to leave the room without leaving the room, smiling, full of useful suggestions. Nobody ever calls it abandonment because it looks so much like care. But the person on the floor knows. The person on the floor always knows the difference between someone who has come to sit with them and someone who has come to talk them into letting the rest of us off the hook. I did not do it. I am proud of almost nothing the way I am proud of not doing it. I swallowed the entire bright arsenal, every last useful correcting word of it, and instead I came into the empty room and I sat down on the floor next to her, with my own back against the cutting table, and I did not say she should feel wonderful, and I did not remind her of the weeper, and I did not suggest we celebrate. I just sat down in the emptiness with her and let it be as empty as it was. Scooped out with a spoon, I said,
Yes, that sounds about right.
That sounds like exactly what finishing a 2-year thing should feel like, honestly. She turned her head and looked at me. You're not going to tell me to be grateful? She said. You are grateful. Grateful and scooped out are not opposites. You can be both. You are both. I'm not going to make you pick the more convenient one, so I feel better. It is a small sentence, and it had cost me a great deal to learn to say it. For most of my life, I had believed that love meant adjusting the other person until they were comfortable, and therefore until I was comfortable, the two adjustments being, I assumed, a single act. They are not a single act. Half the time, the most loving thing available to you is to refuse to adjust the person at all, to let them be exactly as unhappy as they honestly are in front of you, without rushing to sand it down into something easier for the room to hold. She let her head fall back against the table, but something in her shoulders came down half an inch, the particular half inch that means a person has stopped having to defend their own sadness against someone trying to talk them out of it. Everyone wants me to be happy about it, she said. My mother, the buyers, the girls who assisted. They all keep telling me how I should feel, and they're all right, and it's exhausting being told the correct emotion by people who love you. You're the only one who hasn't done it. I sat on the stool while it broke your heart, I said. I'm not going to skip the part where it's allowed to feel like an ending just because the ending went well. We sat in the empty room a long time that evening, and somewhere in the sitting I understood the thing, or she said it. I genuinely cannot now remember which of us arrived at it, which is how I know it was real and ours and not a thing I performed at her. The emptiness was not a malfunction. That was the whole understanding. The hollow after the making was not a flaw in her, not a failure of gratitude, not a problem to be solved or cheered away. It was part of the cycle. It was the fallow. A field cannot bear every year. The old farmers knew this before the science explained it, that you have to let the ground lie fallow, leave it empty and unworked for a season, or it gives you less, and less until it gives you nothing. The emptiness is not the opposite of the harvest. The emptiness is what makes the next harvest possible. A field that is never allowed to be empty is a field being slowly killed by its own productivity. I had this, I think, from a great uncle of mine who kept land and talked about it the way other men talk about their children, and who left a third of his fields empty every year on purpose while his neighbors planted every inch and quietly laughed at him, and who outlasted all of them, his soil still black and giving when theirs had gone to gray dust. He used to say that the empty field was the one doing the most important work and that you could not see the work, and that this was exactly why most people could not bring themselves to leave a field fallow, because we mistrust any labor we are not able to watch. And Selene, who had borne 3 collections in a handful of years, who went from the exhaustion of one straight into the deadline of the next, was a field that had forgotten it was allowed to lie fallow, that the scooped-out feeling was not a verdict on her, but a season she was owed, the necessary empty time without which there would be no cloth left in her to cut. "You're between makings," I said. "That's not nothing. That's a real place. Most of the good things grow in it, actually, in the empty part, in the dark, before there's anything to show. You don't owe anyone a harvest right now. The room is supposed to be empty. You're supposed to be empty. It's the fallow. Let it be fallow." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Nobody has ever once told me I was allowed to be empty. They've told me to rest. Rest is just productivity catching its breath so it can produce again. You're saying something different." "I'm saying the empty isn't the gap between the real things. The empty is one of the real things. The in-breath is as much breathing as the out-breath. You've been exhaling for 2 years.
Breathe in.
I'll sit here while you do it. I'm not in a hurry, and I'm not going to check whether you've started making again." There was a moment. Then, "I will keep most of it, the way I keep the ones that are ours," when she moved across the small distance of the empty floor and put her head on my shoulder in the bare workroom, in the good December light falling on nothing, and we sat there, 2 people on the floor of an empty room, the dress forms standing naked around us like patient witnesses, and she let herself be held in the hollow without either of us trying to fill it. The color of it, the wordless sentence. She did not cry, and she did not brighten. She just rested in the emptiness against me and let the fallow be fallow with her husband sitting in it too, and I thought, this is the thing. This is the whole of what I have to offer that no one else does. Not to fix it, not to fill it, not to cheer it away. Just to be a person who will sit on the floor of the empty room and not need her to be anywhere other than exactly where she is. There is a loneliness particular to being managed by the people who love you, to being met in every low moment by someone whose first instinct is to change how you feel rather than to simply know it. You learn slowly to perform okayness for them, to hurry your own dark seasons along so as not to worry anyone until you are never quite alone with your own actual experience, because there is always someone there trying to improve it. The opposite of that loneliness is not being cheered up. The opposite is one person who will come and sit on the floor and let your empty room stay empty and not leave. After a while, she said, into my shoulder, the first lightness in days, dry and small. "You've gotten unreasonably good at this. The sitting. It's almost annoying. I liked you better when you tried to fix everything and got it charmingly wrong." "No, you didn't." "No," she admitted. "I didn't." That night I wrote it in the 5th notebook in the dark by the bed. The empty room. The collection's gone. The workroom's bare. And she sat on the floor scooped out with a spoon. I have everything I worked for, and I feel like someone scooped me out. The reflex came up instant. Cheer her up.
Caught it just in time.
Cheering up is fixing in a brighter coat. A request to please stop feeling the uncomfortable thing because it's uncomfortable for me.
Didn't do it.
Sat on the floor in the emptiness with her instead. The thing we found, she found, or we did the hollow isn't a malfunction, it's the fallow. A field can't bear every year. The empty isn't the gap between real things. The empty is one of the real things. The in-breath is as much breathing as the out. She said nobody ever told her she was allowed to be empty, only to rest, which is just productivity catching its breath. Stayed awake for the hollow. That's the new rule's hardest application yet, because the hollow gives you nothing back, no triumph to witness, no problem to solve, just a person on the floor of an empty room needing only not to be left there alone. And below it, the working line, the one for the front of the notebook. Don't fix the empty. Don't fill the empty. Don't cheer the empty away. Sit down in the empty. The fallow is not the absence of the work. The fallow is the work's secret other half, the in-breath, the dark where the next thing is already, invisibly beginning. Stay awake for the fallow. It is the hardest watch of all because nothing happens in it, and nothing happening is exactly the thing you have to learn to witness without flinching. It was Saloni, in the end, who found the way out of the room. Not by my prompting, because I had stopped prompting, which is, I am coming to believe, the only condition under which people actually move. I have come to think this is the great paradox of helping anyone you love, that the harder you push them toward the thing you are certain would be good for them, the more firmly they plant their feet, not out of stubbornness, but out of a deep and correct instinct that a self moved by someone else's force has not really moved at all. People do not change in the direction they are pushed. They change in the space that opens when the pushing finally stops, when someone stands close and wants nothing and merely waits, and the waiting, which looks from the outside like doing nothing at all, turns out to be the one thing that has ever actually worked. She came to the kitchen table a few mornings later, into the same light, and wrapped her hands around the chai I had made and not commented on, and said, I think I want to go somewhere. Not to do anything. Not a working trip. I just want to be empty somewhere that isn't this room, where the empty isn't sitting on top of 2 years of cloth dust reminding me what I'm not currently making. She looked at me over the steam. Your brother keeps asking. Bengaluru. The 4 of us at his table, like we said. Mira's been threatening to book the tickets for a year. A small, returning version of her wry mouth. Let's let her. Let's go be fallow in the South for a while, where nobody knows I'm supposed to be a maker. I want to see your brother's new life. I want to sit at a table with the 4 of us in it and not be anybody's deadline. And I felt the particular gladness of a fallow field that has, on its own schedule and by no one's forcing, begun very quietly to think about the spring. I'll tell him, I said. He'll be unbearable about it. He'll plan an itinerary. He'll make a spreadsheet.
Good, she said.
Let him. I'm tired of being the one who makes the thing. Let your brother make the spreadsheet and let Mira book the tickets and let me just be carried somewhere for once, empty and useless and not in charge of a single thing. That, I said, I can absolutely arrange. I wrote one more line in the notebook that night, small, at the bottom of the fallow page. The field decided, by itself, that it was ready to think about going somewhere. I didn't push. I just stopped standing in the doorway holding it open and sat down inside instead and waited, and the waiting turned out to be the thing that let her move. We're going south, to the brother, to the 4 of us table, to be fallow somewhere new. The awake years take a train, apparently. To be continued in episode 35, The Brother's City.
Simbolo di copyright Mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 34 of My Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
I'm Mia.
Thank you for listening.